Hi, everybody. It's Friday, July 31st, 2020. We are more than halfway through the year, if you can believe it. And this is another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. And today we're going to be talking about how a CX mindset can help you build a customer experience strategy. So I'm excited to get into that. For those of you who don't know me, hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie. And as you get settled in here, please tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. We usually get a crowd from all over the world. And so it's really fun to see who's joining us and where you're joining us from. And, how's the first half of the year gone for you? 2020 has been exceptional. And I think we are looking to another exceptional half of the year. But I'm Jeannie Walters, and I have been working in the customer experience field for about 20 plus years. And I do that through consulting and training and speaking and things like that. And I've worked with everybody from small nonprofits to large Fortune 500 companies. And lately, because we are all working from home, or many of us are working remotely, I've been doing a lot of that virtually. So we're doing a lot of virtual workshops and speaking, as well as some customer experience coaching for teams that are distributed. So that's been really fun because I get to stay connected to all of you amazing customer experience leaders, and it helps me understand what your needs are. And that's why we're here today. So don't forget that this is an Ask Me Anything webinar, meaning that we want your questions. The whole idea here is to provide value for you. So feel free. I'll be doing a small presentation after or during or after that. Pop your questions into chat and we will go ahead and, respond to those as we get them and at the end of this session. And then just a reminder, we do these every week, mostly on Fridays with the occasional Thursday. And if you want some reminders about that, you can go to bit.ly/CX Weekly, and that will provide those reminders for you. Next week, we do have a conflict on Friday. So next week is one of those weeks that we're going to be hosting this webinar on Thursday morning at the same time. Well, Thursday morning, my time, Thursday, whatever time this is, wherever you are. So as always, we have David Hornreich here. He is our Director of Marketing, and he will be helping facilitate today. Hi, David.
Hello, hello. So we've got folks from all over. Patrice is here again from Lubbock, Texas. Tyler, as always, from Denver metro area. And I like the way that he describes 2020 so far. Not as planned.
Oh my goodness, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. We've also got folks from Chicago. Yay, Chicago.
Yay.
Canada. We've got Paris,
Mm.
Minneapolis, Charlotte. So
Excellent. Yeah, I heard Paris is having a heat wave right now. So hope you're staying cool while you're there. So, well, why don't we jump in today? We've got a great crowd. We've got a really robust topic, I think. So let's go ahead and chat about how a customer experience mindset can help you build a customer experience strategy. So the first thing here that I wanted to mention is that when we are trained as business people, a lot of times we aren't trained to really be customer centric. And so when we ask people to start really considering putting the customer first, really making sure that every business decision we make has the customer in mind, that actually flies in the face of some traditional ways that we have been trained and some legacies in some of our organizations, especially the ones that have been around for a long time. Because think about business plans. Business plans rarely mention the customer past the acquisition. So what they do is business plans tell you really focus on marketing, really focus on sales, get that customer to purchase something. And then it kind of ends a lot of the time. Now, there are some business plans that are designed to do this a little better, but traditionally, this has been how we've been told to plan businesses. So if we are talking about the customer and trying to get everybody in our organization to think about them in this way, we are actually going against some of that traditional training that we've had. The other thing is that, business leaders are asked to report things in dollars and cents. And of course, that makes sense. Those are business results. but we literally take the customer out of the equation. And so when we're having these big discussions around business strategy, we're not actually including the customer in that discussion. And the other thing that happens is as people go up in an organization, as they get through different leadership levels, they're often getting further and further away from actual interaction with customers. And so the further up you go in an organization, the longer it's been, in many cases, that they have actually interacted directly with a customer or even observed the customer experience kind of in that real time. And so executives who are making these decisions, leaders who are making these decisions about customer experience often are pretty far removed from the actual customer. So that's why having this customer centric mindset is so important, because it helps us put the customer front and center and ask the questions we need to ask on behalf of our customers. We need to ask sometimes for more feedback. We need to ask to make sure that, we're considering the customer's overall journey. All of those things, they only happen if you really have this mindset focused and throughout your organization. So customer experience leaders first have to dedicate themselves to this idea of a customer-centric mindset. And then we need to make sure we understand what to do with that. We need to make sure that we have a vision of what the customer experience should be, and we understand where we're going. And if we have that, that's the first step. But nothing happens with that if you don't actually put a strategy behind it. Like anything else, you could have a vision of, being a millionaire, but if you don't do anything about that, then that's not just going to magically come true. And I think sometimes customer experience is treated like, if we just define it, if we just say, let's have a great customer experience, everything else will fall into place. It takes real work. It takes a strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about these 5 things. First, start with your company's goals, ask the questions that you need to design the customer experience, turn those answers from those questions into plans. Don't forget to plan for measuring success, and finally, how to develop, how improvements will be addressed. So let's dig in. First, we want to start with your company's goals. Now, I have seen a lot of customer experience leaders who are asked to basically just create a better customer experience. And that's what they're told to do. They're not given any way to measure success. They're not told what success looks like. And then after a year or two, suddenly they're being asked, well, what is this really doing for us? It's just about being nice to our customers. What does this do for our brand? And many customer experience strategies kind of get stuck here, because if we don't start with really evaluating what is most important to our brand, to our organization right now, then we're going to create a customer experience strategy that's a little bit in a vacuum from the overall goals of the organization. And that's why this is so important. We want to make sure that we understand what success looks like for our strategy and what that means for the success of the organization. So this is not just for leaders. We need everybody on board with this, but really start with those company goals. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what those are. And then you need to start building a customer experience strategy that will support that. The next thing to do is really ask a lot of questions. Ask what you need to design the right customer experience based on that vision that you have for it, based on the success of your organization. And so sometimes we don't have the data, the tools, other things that we need to really execute on the strategy. So the first thing we want to do is start asking, do we know who our customers are? That seems like such a basic question, but so many leaders kind of skip this step. We make a lot of assumptions about, oh, we're all speaking the same language about who our customers are. But then when you really start asking people in the organization, people are defining the customer differently. Maybe you don't have a handle on exactly who they are. So look for if you have those personas or customer segmentation or any of that sort of thing. And if you don't have those, maybe part of your strategy is about, we need this. We need to understand our customers in order to deliver more. So start asking questions about what you have. The other thing to ask is, how are we measuring customer experience? What metrics are used? In many organizations, we have, dashboards that tell us our net promoter score, our customer satisfaction score, Maybe in your contact center, you're using things like first call resolution. And so, really identifying what are the metrics that we're already measuring and how are we measuring them? And what does that mean for our organization? Does everybody understand what it means when we can increase first call resolution, for instance? What does that actually mean? Well, typically, that means that you're going to lower costs. That means that you're going to have happier customers, all of those things. But really look for how are we measuring this today and what do we need to measure for tomorrow? And then we also want to figure out how are we gathering customer feedback? Where is this coming from? Are we doing this on a regular basis? If so, who is included in that? What's the visibility of that feedback? What do we need to do in order to, gather feedback consistently if that's not something we're doing? And then are there tools already available? Do you have customer journey maps, empathy maps, stakeholder maps? Do you have these things and can you use them kind of in your toolkit as you build this strategy? If you don't have them, do you need them? Will that help you understand the customer's journey and then improve it? So, asking these questions, part of this is about really understanding what's available out there, what data do we have, what data do we need, and what do we need to get there? And then the other thing I want to stress here is that the employee experience is such a huge part of customer experience. We've talked about this on these webinars before. And what we need to do as CX leaders is make sure that our employees really understand their role here. They understand how their efforts are connected to the customer's journey. And if that is so far out of the realm of reality for your organization at this point in time, just remember that as you move forward. Think about ways you can communicate to employees on a more regular basis as you execute on your customer experience strategy. So all of these questions, and we could do this for 100 questions. The point here is to really brainstorm, what do you need? What do you need to find? And what will help you execute on this customer experience strategy? So the next thing you want to do is, once you have all those answers for those questions, once you have identified, what success looks like, and then you've identified what tools and data you already have and what tools and data you need, then you want to turn those answers into plans. Because really, when we talk about business strategy, it really is just about developing the processes, the systems, the tools, and the behaviors to achieve an overall goal. So the vision is your goal. You want to tie that to your business goals, your overall, the overall organizational goals. And then you want to start breaking that down into what do we need in order to execute that. And so this could show up in places like developing, let's say, contact center training in some cases. It can be things like that. It can be about, we need a journey map in order to understand our customers. We need to execute more empathy training in order to improve our NPS score. And that will improve our revenue. That will improve our retention, all the time, tying it back to those overall business goals. And then we also want to know exactly how to measure success. This is something I have seen over and over and over. And some of you probably are living in a world where your customer experience role descriptions don't really include how to measure success. I see this a lot when I hear from headhunters or people run their job descriptions by me. And I will ask that question: how would somebody measure success? How do you know if they're successful? We have to keep asking that question around customer experience strategy as well. But we also need to consider the normal limitations that we have within business. We have budgets, we have timelines, we have certain constraints. We might not have enough resources. We might not have the accountability that we want over certain parts of the business. We need to keep that in mind as we measure success as well. Because if we say things like, oh, we're going to have a best in class customer experience in 12 months, what does that mean? What does that mean? How do you measure that? Make sure that you're looking at not only how you can measure things like, okay, if we improve NPS in 12 months, that's going to bring us a certain amount of revenue. But sometimes measuring success is getting those tools in place, getting those processes in place, getting those things, to support your strategy in place. So some of your goals to measure might be, We will complete a journey map in 6 months, and that will identify, the top 10 priorities for improvement or whatever it is. But make sure that you're always thinking about what does success look like and how can we measure that moving forward? Because that's where, unfortunately, a lot of customer experience strategies do fall down. And we've heard the stats about what's happening with customer experience leadership. There was a prediction, Forrester predicted last year that 1 in 4 customer experience leaders would lose their job because they couldn't prove ROI. They could not prove return on investment. We have to start talking about this in very direct ways, but that starts with understanding what success is to begin with, and then really understanding how we're measuring that and communicating that throughout our organizational leadership. And then finally, we want to understand that, okay, we're going to find all these things that we want to fix and address in the customer journey. We are going to get all this great, rich customer feedback, and that will tell us things that we need to address. But if you haven't figured out how you take that next step, what does that look like? Because customer experience leaders typically don't have purview over the actual execution of changing the experience. So if you've identified that, you've got problems in your mobile app, everybody hates it, you need to redesign it, et cetera, you're not most likely going to be the one to do that. You need to work with the digital leaders, the mobile experience people, and you also need to make sure that they understand that this is a priority. Sometimes in software, what happens is we come back and we say, you know what, customers really don't like this part of the experience. And software teams, the product development teams will say, okay, we'll put that in the roadmap. And that might be 6 months, that might be 2 years, but it doesn't feel like progress because we're not really closing the loop in the real time that we need to. So before you execute this strategy, you need to make sure that your leadership is on board with this, that you can build those bridges, that you have a cross-functional team, that you've identified, okay, here are the ways that we're going to prioritize. What are the most important things to address? And that could be, a prioritization matrix, which I'm a big fan of what the impact will have, what the cost will have, considering those two things and really just making sure that you understand how to prioritize and that you understand how you're actually going to be able to execute on these improvements that you've identified. So those 5 things are really what can help you before you jump in to your customer experience strategy. Really thinking about, how can we create that mindset? How can I lead with that mindset? How can I identify the vision, talk about that vision, create a customer experience mission, which you guys know I love, and, really then break that down into, okay, here's the situation today in our organization. Here are the tools that we have. Here are the processes. Here are the data points that we have. What do we need in order to execute on this? And what will that mean for our organizational success? It always comes back to that. What will that mean for our success? Because as much as I believe that sometimes in customer experience work, we have to absolutely do the right thing by our customer. That's our number one goal. We still have to do that in the realm of reality. And that is with our organizational goals and limitations. So we might not have the budget to do everything we want. We might not have the resources to do everything we want, but we have enough to get started. We can start with something. And the last thing I want to say here is that I know that customer experience work can feel pretty overwhelming. And that's something I hear from a lot of leaders because I think we believe that we want to do the right thing. We want to kind of boil the ocean. We want to address all the things that our customers are bringing to us. We know we can do better as an organization, and there's always feedback coming in. And so it can feel very overwhelming. But it can also be really exciting. And it's exciting. And I think you guys all show up here week after week because we really believe that the work we're doing matters. It matters to the individuals that we're serving. And it means more than just, a pleasant interaction for them. We're helping them achieve something. People are customers because they want value from something, because they want to achieve a goal. And we're helping them with that every time that we improve the experience, that we listen to their feedback, that we close that loop with them, all of those things. And so I know that that part is really exciting and rewarding for all of us. With a customer experience strategy, if you really understand where you're going and what success looks like, that can reduce that feeling of overwhelm, and it can boost those feelings of excitement and the rewarding work that we do. And so this is heavy lifting in some cases. We really need to roll up our sleeves and get this right before we kind of, go forth and make all the improvements. And I know sometimes that can be frustrating, but I really encourage you to think about these things and make sure that you are kind of putting the horse before the cart, because otherwise it can be really easy to find yourself not really seeing clearly what success is, and then not being able to share that with your leadership, with your organization. So start there and just, do your best to put these plans in place, which I know you all are. So on that note, I would love to open it up for questions and have a great discussion.
Yeah, and we've got some great questions coming in already. Before we get into those, I do want to mention, Jeannie, you had mentioned uh, talking about employee experience in a previous webinar. If you have missed any of these webinars in the past, we do keep an archive of them on YouTube. So bit.ly/GenieYT will get you any of those that you've missed. I know we've got at least one or two on employee experience, as well as many other topics. So check those out.
Thank you.
But let's get to the questions. We've got a bunch of good ones. Let's start with Patrice. So she's got a couple questions. Her first: how do we address the comment that's not a valid concern for the customer or from the customer when the customers provide feedback? What do we do when employees just don't think it means
Yep.
anything?
I love this question, Patrice, because it's very, very common. And when I in some keynotes that I do, I start with something about cognitive dissonance and why that's something that happens in customer experience work. And what I mean by that is cognitive dissonance is when somebody holds up a fact that goes against your deeply held beliefs. Your brain literally starts telling you that's not true, don't believe it, all of that thing. And what happens in customer experience work is that we are on the inside. We see the people who are doing their jobs. We know everybody's working hard. We know we designed that process really well. So when a customer brings feedback to us that goes against those deeply held beliefs, it's really easy to dismiss it. Our brain literally starts telling us, don't believe that. You know that the process works really well. I bring up an example of how you might be in an organization where you sit next to the people in billing and you go to lunch with Sally from billing every day, and you guys are friends and everything's great. And then you see a customer comment that Sally was rude, and you think, well, no, that can't be. That's not the Sally I know. I'm just going to ignore that. And we do that because we are seeing the inside, and all we can do as human beings is see our perspective. We can work really hard to understand and empathize, but we literally cannot see anybody else's perspective except our own. And so, what I would do is encourage more conversations about that. About, you know what? We know everybody here is working really, really hard. We know that we designed these processes in the right way, and that we thought it was really going to work for customers. What we're hearing is that it's not working as well as we thought. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are closing that loop with customers. We are hearing them. If you've made that promise, reinforce that promise. We promised our customers that we would listen to them. And this is one of those examples where it might be hard to hear, but we really need to listen to them. And I will be honest, some people, it's really challenging. It's really challenging with people who think, no, I've got this. It's all good. I've seen this with people who say, we don't need journey maps. We've got process maps. And that's all from the inside out, but they feel like that's enough. And why bother? Why bother listening to customers? And so I think the more that you can open up that conversation and really acknowledge the hard work that everybody's doing and acknowledge that it is good work, because people get very defensive about that. That's one thing. And the other thing is to lean on that promise about customer listening and making sure that you're responding to customers. And then if you can get one small win, that can go a long way too. So look for ways that even maybe in your role, you've had to hear something where you're like, that's not what I want to hear from customers, but then you did something about it and achieved better results. Look for those very small wins to start communicating why it's so important. It is a challenge. And this goes back to how we were trained as business people. We are often trained that process and profit is more important than the people. And so if we are trained that from such an early age, and everybody in the organization kind of knows that they're held accountable for the process side of things, but not the people side of things, it can be easy to overlook. So keep talking about it, keep communicating. And if you can, just lower those defenses by basically saying, hey, we know everybody's working hard. We know that we did this. It's just not working the way we thought it would for customers. And so we need to respond to them in this way.
I'm going to toss in a comment from Tyler. You talked about excellence or being best in class. I like Tyler's comment. He says, in my experience, we don't often define what we mean by excellence. Excellent at what?
Yep.
Before you define success, you must define what an excellent customer experience means. Is it ease of business, quality, delivery, backline support? So all of these things.
Yes. Amen. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's why I often shudder when I see some of the people who come to me and say, we've got a great mission, we've got a great customer experience vision. And it literally says things like, to provide great customer service. And it's like that, we have to get better at defining these things, and we have to put a stake in the ground about it. And I've brought this up before, but a lot of times there are conflicts between the values that you have and the way you execute them. So it might be more important to respond quickly in some cases. So maybe speed is really important in your industry. And in other industries, it's more important to take the time to have more accuracy. Those two things are in conflict. So if you don't define exactly what you mean by excellent, then you're going to have people who are making different judgment calls throughout your organization. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to make sure that everybody has something they can tuck into their heart and have this mindset and deliver the experience consistently. So great point, Tyler. Thank you.
Well said. Let's jump to a question from Edwin. Edwin asks, could you share some tips of building or creating the awareness across the organization in terms of CX ownership, not just the support center? How do you get that broad support?
Yeah, well, the first is talk to your leaders. See if your C-suite can kind of get on board with this, because it really does have to come from the top. But I have also seen this happen with a little bit of osmosis. And what I mean by that is, if your contact center leaders, for instance, are really understanding and executing on a CX strategy that's working, then the more you can share that with your organization, people will start picking up like, oh, they're getting great results. What's happening over here? So that's one thing, is how can you communicate? I've seen this with like internal newsletters. I've seen this where one of the more creative things I saw was a customer service leader who really wanted to get people on board that it was more than just reaction. It was more than just reactive customer service to create a great customer experience. So what he did was actually reach out and ask for quote unquote informational interviews with different leaders of different organizations, and try to really ask them, what do you see as your role with customer experience? What do you see as how can customer service support you and what your goals are? And those conversations led to some awareness. Now it took some doing, but I think that that's how these things happen. It is a little bit of, if it's coming from the top, that can help a lot. So if you have access to that C-suite level, see if you can get some advocates for you, and then start looking around for people who you want to engage and start engaging them with these conversations. The other thing that I've seen, which I really like, is looking for the people who are natural superstars, right? We have people throughout the organization who do understand this, who are on board, who are doing what they can to create a better customer experience. If you can start identifying them at whatever level they're at, then you can start doing things like, deputizing them and basically saying, hey, we need an army of customer experience advocates throughout our organization. And you're the deputy for your department. And this can be done even without resources. Sometimes people get like swag from the company or just little trinkets. But if they really want to make this change, it can be a really great role for them. And sometimes that's like brown bag lunches or different webinars offering them learning so that they can really understand how to communicate about this. And that peer to peer conversation that can really be helpful in organizations as well. So you kind of want to come from the top down and the bottom up.
I like it. Let's jump ahead to a question. Well, let's do. Patrice had a second question, so let's get to that. So Patrice asks, how can we tactfully gain a deeper understanding of differing projects across the organization that impact customers without stepping on the toes of the team leaders and stakeholders of those projects?
Mm. Another good question, Patrice, and very common, I have to say. So I think this comes down to conversation and offering resources. So what I mean by that is I've seen where there might be, and I'm using software again just because it's top of mind, but if there could be a product development team working on something that has a big impact on customers, and if they're not engaging with the customer experience team and understanding the insights and the feedback that customers have already provided, then that's not going to be the best product. And so I think offering things like, you know what, we're training people on how to do journey maps. Would that be helpful to you? We are offering to facilitate virtual customer roundtables or customer focus groups. Would that be helpful to you? And really get in their space about their goals. What is their goal with that project? Is it to, earn more market share? Is it to earn more customer wallet? Whatever it is. So tie back what you can offer to their goals. And sometimes that's skills, like we talked about. Sometimes it's tools like, hey, we did this great customer journey map, and I'd love to go over it with you and understand where this project fits into the customer journey. So building bridges like that can be really useful on both sides. And it just builds that relationship then and understanding about what's happening. And then again, if you have any sort of way into that C-suite leadership who can really help you hold people accountable here, who can help you define that this is part of everybody's role, that can be very helpful as well. Sometimes it just takes one person. A lot of times the CMO is, a natural ally because they understand that marketing and customer experience have to kind of go hand in hand. So if you can get people like that on board, they can help you drive the results that you want throughout your organization.
So Mark has a question which I love. He asks, why do you think CX is such a trend now and not earlier? Or as I like to think of it, what took so long?
I love this. So this question, I've gotten this a few times, and I'm always a little baffled because, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't see it as a trend, but I totally understand what you're talking about because there are people who are kind of just focused on this, and we're having bigger conversations, and more people are really understanding the value of customer experience. And in fact, in the blog this week, I talked about the Business Roundtable, which is this, elite group of CEOs of the most successful, biggest enterprise companies in the United States. And they came out with a statement last year after 30 years of saying, you know what, the most important thing, the goal of corporations should be to provide shareholder value. And most corporations behaved this way. And so everybody had these quarterly cycles where they would do things just to get the profit for shareholders. That was their main goal. and they could sacrifice other things like customer experience, like employee experience. What happened in 2019 was the Business Roundtable came out with a statement that said, nope, now we see we need a more well-rounded goal here. We need to consider our customers. We need to consider the community. We need to consider our employees as, the goals of corporations. And so by making that switch, I mean, that was a big deal. I mean, that was a really big deal. And I think that's the mindset that is starting to change. Because again, this goes back to business training. If we've been told from the very beginning of time that the most important thing is to provide shareholder value or the most important thing is profit, then you're going to sacrifice other parts of the business, including customer experience, in order to get there. Now we're having conversations where people are understanding by investing in customer experience, by making sure that you are providing the experience that is best for your customers and your brand, that you will get these amazing returns on that investment. You will get higher renewal rates. You will get lower costs for customer service, all these things. But it took a while to have that conversation. And I think that's why things are changing. People are starting to understand and connect those dots. But amen to your point about what took so long. I mean, those of us here, I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? Like everybody here really understands this and is dedicated to it. And it can be a little baffling when people start saying, oh, so we have to think about customers. Interesting. And so I totally hear you on that one. It did take a while, but I do think that the conversation is changing for the better. And we're all part of it, which is exciting.
So earlier, Patrice asked a question about, what do we do when leaders just dismiss customer feedback? We've also talked a little bit about how overwhelming CX can be. I think this came in from email, but I think it's a good way of tying those two together. What do we do when decision makers say they can't do anything? What are some good baby steps to start with to kind of avoid the overwhelm?
Yeah, good question. So I think the thing that I've seen that works is when we, again, define what success looks like and start having those conversations. So sometimes leaders are told, we don't have resources for this. We're not dedicated to this. This isn't a priority, those types of things. What I like to do with customer experience leaders is define, okay, what is the cost of not doing this? Define that, because there are costs to not investing in customer experience. So if you can start communicating that and start really communicating what it would look like if you could invest in customer experience. And then the other part of this that you guys have heard me talk about before too is tell those customer stories. People don't react to data and dashboards like they do to stories. So if you can start identifying patterns with customer stories, maybe you see in their survey results that people are complaining about similar things. People are telling you, you know what, I'm shopping around because you guys aren't doing what you promised. Those types of things can be very powerful, as well as the flip side of look what happens when it goes well. What if we could make sure that it went well for every single customer? Because, employees a lot of times drive the customer experience. And so you might have a superstar employee who always delivers, but you haven't been able to scale that. You haven't been able to turn that into best practices. Those are the types of things where if you can make the case for that, then you can start seeing the results. They will start seeing the business results and start understanding the investment does pay off. So that's what I like to do, is tie that to the costs of it, of not doing anything, and then also tell those customer stories to humanize it and to make sure that people can really understand that it's not just the cost of dollars and cents. We're dealing with people, and there are costs to that as well. There are emotional costs. Sometimes they're greater than that. Sometimes they're financial. And so we want to paint that picture as best we can for what the cost of not doing anything is and what it could be if we did invest.
Just a reminder, if you do have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we've got one more here from Linda. And Linda asks, how do you deal with leadership who values risk management over customer experience excellence. And I kind of wonder, to what degree are those mutually exclusive?
Hmm. Well, Linda, if I had to guess, I'd say maybe you're in financial services. But yeah, risk. Okay, so risk is interesting because I think people define it different ways. And in different industries, it can mean different things. Obviously, in things like insurance, risk is part of the equation. We need to make sure that we are understanding the risk for the profitability of the company. So that's a big deal. But I think that what we have to make the case for is that even if we can't, we can still manage risk when we're trying different things with customer experience. We can still do pilot programs. We can still do A/B testing. We can do all of these things to really minimize the risk of trying something big. So that's one thing. The other thing is, what is the risk really? Like, define that, because sometimes we look at something like in a retail situation, one person maybe came in, one customer, and abused the return policy, right? They just kept returning everything and it was a mess and everybody was getting angry. And so then we changed the return policy for everybody because we don't want to risk that every single customer does that. But guess what? Most customers don't. So really look at what is the real risk here and what is the risk of changing it. So if we were to change that return policy and it was a more negative outcome for 90% of our customers, what would that tell us? Well, look at the feedback. They're probably complaining about it. They're probably talking about it on social media. They're telling their friends that they changed the return policy. It's not worth shopping there anymore. So looking for what is the real risk, I think, is super important, because we have people among us who it's their job to assess risk, and we love them. We need them there. We need legal. We need compliance. We need the regulators, all of those people. But we also need to, work with them and ask what is the actual risk? What is the risk of not moving forward with something, with not making progress with the customer experience? And then, you know, do what you can to lower their anxiety by trying things small. Try pilot programs, try focus groups. You guys have heard me say this before. I'm a big fan of virtual versus real life focus groups because I think you get better information from individuals. But you can try different things to really alleviate some of their anxiety about risk. Back in the 90s when I started, I had to really go to bat with the legal team of one of the largest property and casualty insurers in the world to say, you know what, we don't have to call them the insured. And even that felt like a risk to them because it had always been done that way. So what it took was a lot of conversations, a lot of examples of other industries that I could show them. And finally we got their comfort level where they said, "Oh, right, we can just say you because we're talking directly to the customer." That had never been done before. So that's the type of thing where sometimes we get stuck because the people who are there to assess the risk, sometimes the easiest thing is just to keep doing what they've always been doing. That has worked for them, right? So we have to work on making a better argument for why it's worth taking those baby steps and going forward with, some things that might feel risky to them, but it's overall better for the customer and it's overall better for the company.
Wonderful. Well, that's going to do it for the Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions this week. Really, really great discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Fantastic.
Jeannie, where can folks find you?
Well, they can find me in so many places. So they can find me, I should say, not they. I'm talking right to you. You can
The
find me on
insured.
Yes, the insured. You can find me on LinkedIn. Of course, we've got our website at experienceinvestigators.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, all of those places. I'm on Instagram, you name it, you can find me. And then, of course, I have several courses on LinkedIn Learning as well. And so I welcome you to check those out and provide that feedback. And just as a reminder, we do this every week, usually on Friday, with the occasional Thursday thrown in. And next week, we will be talking about how to know your customer. And that's a piece of this customer experience strategy. And overall, in the next few weeks and months, we're really digging into how to build a customer experience habit in your organization. So we'll be covering things like strategy and mindset, of course, but also customer-centric culture. How do you build that? What is the employee experience? How do you have to develop that? And what are the best practices around that? The metrics, the measurements, how to improve, all of those things. So we're really excited about this because we feel like, these topics are big and robust and changing all the time. And our job is to support you in the work that you're doing. And so hopefully that's what this series will do. So if you would like to provide feedback, we are always interested in feedback, of course, about these webinars or anything else. And so you can do that at bit.ly/let Jeannie know. That's Jeannie with 2 N's. You guys know that. And, we always look forward to that. Thank you to those of you who show up week after week. Thank you to the new people who showed up today. And if you have questions and you're watching the replay, please feel free to drop those in and I'll do my best to answer those as well. So, as always, we appreciate your time and we appreciate you being here. And I especially appreciate that you help me live my mission, which is to create fewer ruined days for customers. By being here, you're helping me do that. So thank you for that. And thank you for your dedication to customers. So we will see you next Thursday. Thanks, everybody.